These titles were a ton of fun to make. I was able to get really creative with it, and I think they turned out really well. I first started off with Particular and added these dust particles to fill in the atmosphere of the scene a bit. And then from there I used Element 3D to build the 3D text. And then I lit the text with point lights. And then I added this really cool saber effect from Video Copilot. There's tons of tutorials out there, so I won't get too in depth, but essentially I made the layer 3D and then lined it up in line with the 3D text so it looked like it was on top of it. And then I went in and refined it a bit more, adding some more of that saber in the background, and then color graded the whole thing. Okay, so this shot requires a bit of explanation, and I don't really remember how I did it. So I knew I wanted to do something cool with the car. So I started by tracking the shot, and then I added this particle system and just tweaked the settings until I found something that looked cool. And I was trying to get some kind of glow over him. I couldn't get what I was working, so I decided to mess around with it more. And then something weird happened when I pre-comped it. The whole thing just kind of blew up on the screen, so I figured I'd mess around with this some more. So you see the particles started in front of the screen and then ended up at the top. I figured I could warp it in some kind of way so it would cover the entire screen. I thought it might look cool. What I did was, using a program called Reshade, I went in and recorded a depth matte of the scene. So essentially what's darker is closer to the screen, and After Effects can interpret that and use that for effects. So I took this adjustment layer and I did what's called a Luma matte on that depth information. And so with that, I was able to apply this effect Kaleidopolar, which created this really cool warping effect. And because I had that depth matte information, it only covered the background instead of this whole foreground with the car. And then I felt like the edges were a bit too jagged, so I added RSMB, which essentially reads the motion of the pixels on the screen and adds motion blur to it. That kind of added this cool liquidy effect and tied it all together. And then from there, I really just added glows to the car and then this heat distortion effect to give it a bit of a wavy atmosphere. And I ended up with this really cool effect that I hadn't started off with in mind at all. And just by messing around, I was able to find something that I thought looked pretty cool. So for this shot, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to track something in the scene and add some cool effects. I ended up with these particles. All I did was track the shot and get a 3D camera, and then I was able to add in what kind of 3D effects I wanted. So I used the CC particle world, and I just messed around with the settings until I found what looked good. So this shot I definitely spent the most time on, and breaking it down like this reveals the flaws, so just squint your eyes really hard and it will still look good. So the very first thing I did for this shot was just cut out the car, and keep in mind this was before green screen was a thing, and it doesn't look that great because of it, but it's fast enough that nobody notices. From there, I found this tutorial for this space scene that was fairly easy to make with this fractal noise effect and just adding some particles in, and then I animated this 3D camera to go in line with the transition on the other scene, and I used that as my background. From there, it was mainly me just messing around with this program called Particular, which allows you to do these really powerful particle effects inside of After Effects. And what I did was I animated these lights moving, and then I set them as emitters in Particular so that it was leaving this trail of particles, and then I was able to go in and customize the look of the particle. And if I wanted to move the direction of the animation of the particles, all I had to do was change the light. And to get the particles to glow even more, what I did was I duplicated that Particular layer and then set both of the blend modes to add. From there, I went in and time remapped the particles so they had a bit more impact when they hit the car, and then I faded everything out to make that transition a bit more seamless. This effect was kind of the culmination of what I had learned from doing the previous effects. Once again, I started off by tracking the scene. From there, I did that same light setup as an emitter for the Particular layers. You can also see right before the car goes, it kind of charges up and has this bit of distortion. And I used that Saber plugin from Video Copilot. So I made masks around the emitters of the car, and then I keyframed the glow intensity to get brighter as it went on. And then I added some heat distortion on top of everything else. I also added this lens flare right when the car went off, and I also added a little bit of camera shake. Now, keep in mind, this is how I did everything. If anybody has any suggestions on how I could have improved it in the future, or how I should have done something differently to make it easier on myself, feel free to let me know. If you guys like these kind of videos, maybe I can make breakdowns of other effects that I've done in the past. And I have plenty more videos coming in the future, so make sure to subscribe so you're notified when those videos come out.